On June 25, 1876, in the early afternoon, in what is now southern Montana, along the shores of the Little Bighorn River, referred to by the Lakota as the Greasy Grass, a vast encampment of Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho engaged in their daily tasks and leisure. Many young warriors were just rising, weary from a night of festivities and dancing. Children played in the river, women managed campfires, and young men tended to the large horse herds owned by the camp. This was, in fact, the largest documented gathering of Plains tribes in history. The Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho had united during this scorching plains summer to oppose U.S. Army forces. The U.S. Army was charged with enforcing policies established by the U.S. government, often in breach of treaties signed with native tribes from Florida to the Pacific Northwest. The Army's cavalry, known among the Plains tribes as the Bluecoats, were the most commonly encountered, as they were the only forces able to track, chase, and confront horseback warriors across the expansive plains. The Bluecoats had delivered devastating losses to the Plains tribes and committed acts that could be described as massacres against many, including the Lakota and Cheyenne. Yet they had also endured brutal violence from native warriors, violence that at times matched or exceeded the intensity faced by soldiers during the Civil War. The cavalry was led by officers who had refined their tactics in some of the Civil War's fiercest battles, including Captain Frederick Benteen, Major Marcus Reno, and Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. Most of the enlisted soldiers, however, were relatively unskilled in Plains combat. Many were recent immigrants now fighting for survival in isolated outposts against an enemy that struck suddenly, fought with extreme ferocity, mutilated the fallen in horrific ways, and vanished swiftly. The Army had been scouring the northern plains for years, attempting to subdue the Plains tribes, but they had struggled for decades. Battling a decentralized foe presented challenges that officers trained in conventional Napoleonic tactics found hard to overcome effectively. On this day, the large encampment of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, estimated to include between 6,000 and 10,000 people across a 2-mile expanse, felt relatively safe. They knew their enemies were nearby, but believed it would be days before any major clash occurred. Most war chiefs agreed that their forces had time to prepare for a confrontation with the Bluecoats. But one man sat thoughtfully in his lodge, disturbed by a sense of unease. He had barely slept the previous night, convinced that a morning assault by the cavalry was imminent. The light of dawn had shown his prediction to be slightly inaccurate, but he still sensed something was amiss, that the Bluecoats were closer than others thought. This man was born of a union between tribes, his father an Oglala Lakota and his mother from the Minneconjou band. As a youth, he was called Curly. At 14, he undertook a vision quest in the Black Hills of Dakotas. For 3 days and nights he fasted until a spirit appeared in a vision. The spirit declared that his life must be devoted to his people's welfare, that he would become a great warrior, and that no bullet or arrow would kill him. However, the vision also prophesied that he would die a martyr's death at the hands of the Bluecoats. He returned to his village and began his journey as a celebrated warrior. That was long ago. Now married, his face carried a scar from a bullet wound received years earlier when the envious husband of Black Buffalo woman discovered their elopement. She was the love of his life, and though they had been separated, the scar remained a constant reminder of their lost love. In the years since his vision quest and this summer day in 1876, the young warrior had grown into a formidable fighter and a respected leader. Though personal indiscretions with married women had cost him the official title of chief, this was a minor detail. He was a war chief, and his name inspired awe among his allies and fear in his enemies. He was a complex figure, a mystery within a riddle. To his people, he was known as Tashunka Witko, but history remembers him as Crazy Horse. While Crazy Horse's prediction of an attack was slightly off in timing, his intuition about a major battle that day would prove accurate. He and his fellow Plains warriors would engage in the largest battle in Plains warfare history, nearly annihilating their despised enemies, the Bluecoats. The battle began when some villagers noticed a dust cloud caused by the 7th Cavalry's clash with a Lakota camp downstream. During this skirmish, 2 cavalrymen's horses were startled by gunfire, bugle calls, and shouts bolting from the battlefield with their riders unable to control them. Unfortunately for these men, their horses galloped straight toward Crazy Horse's encampment. They were met by surprised Lakota warriors, whose initial shock turned to fury. The 2 soldiers were swiftly pulled from their mounts and killed with clubs and knives as they begged for mercy. Word soon reached Crazy Horse that the cavalry was attacking. Seemingly unsurprised and perhaps slightly indignant, the seasoned warrior called for his war ponies to be gathered and brought to his lodge. He carefully applied his war paint, covering his upper body in yellow pigment and drawing a single lightning bolt down the left side of his face. He fastened the single feather he wore in his hair, in contrast to the elaborate war bonnets preferred by many of his fellow warriors. As he prepared, younger warriors, those who had disregarded his warnings and danced into the early hours, began to clamor. They urged an immediate attack, fearing the fighting would end before they could claim trophies or honor. But Crazy Horse remained calm and composed. Finally, his war ponies were brought to his lodge. After what felt like an agonizing wait for the younger warriors, Crazy Horse emerged, chose a war horse, mounted it, and rode out of the village with a large group of warriors following. They headed first to a ridgeline where Major Reno was attempting to establish a defensive position with his men, including Crow Scouts, in a patch of timber. With the arrival of Crazy Horse and his warriors, the assault on Reno's unit became overwhelming. Reno's favorite Crow Scout was killed just feet away, leaving Reno covered in the scout's blood and brains. As the Lakota swirled around the cavalrymen, firing arrows and bullets from all directions, all hope seemed lost for Reno's men. Unable to withstand the terror, some troops attempted to flee. Crazy Horse rode among the desperate soldiers, methodically striking them down with his war club. Some were so panicked they could only walk, frantically pumping their arms. Others stopped, turned, and pleaded with their Lakota adversaries for mercy or to be taken prisoner. All were swiftly killed with war clubs, bullets, or arrows. Reno and some of his men survived, but only because Custer and his isolated contingent became a more immediate target. Custer, facing a relentless onslaught from a native force far larger than he had expected, grew desperate. He made a frantic dash toward the heart of the main village, hoping to sweep through, capture women and children as hostages, and negotiate a retreat. This tactic, though shocking today, was not uncommon on the plains at the time. However, Custer and his men never reached the village. They became trapped on a small hill, fighting a desperate, roving retreat. Crazy Horse was on his way. Upon arriving, Crazy Horse surveyed the battlefield and conferred with his fellow warriors, all while calmly firing his rifle and killing as many soldiers as possible from atop a small hill. Then he and his men attacked the right flank of Custer's forces, splitting the already diminished unit into two smaller groups. As the fighting continued, Crazy Horse rode between the two groups, blowing his piercing eagle-bone whistle and shouting orders. Despite this near-suicidal behavior, he remained unharmed, as his vision had foretold. By this time, the chaos of battle had shaken even the 7th Cavalry's war horses. Those not killed by enemy fire were released as the surviving soldiers threw themselves face down in the grass, trying to make themselves smaller targets. This desperate situation lasted only briefly. The air was pierced by loud war whistles, signaling a massive general charge by the Lakota and their allies to finish off Custer and his remaining men, including Custer's 2 brothers and his teenage nephew. Thousands of warriors swarmed the hill. Custer and his men fired an initial volley that briefly stalled the attack, but within seconds the charge resumed. The warriors overwhelmed the cavalrymen, cutting down as many as they could, even as some soldiers attempted to flee southward. All were killed within minutes. By the end of the day, every one of the 210 men under Custer's immediate command lay dead on that hill near the banks of the Little Bighorn River. The Battle of the Little Bighorn, as it is known today, became one of the most iconic moments in American history. It was also a pivotal moment in Northern Plains tribal history, marking both a great victory and the beginning of the end for their way of life. The U.S. Army would return, seeking vengeance for the defeat. The next day, Crazy Horse was appointed commander-in-chief of the combined forces of the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. His legend was cemented, but his prophecy was only partially fulfilled. A little over a year later, on September 5, 1877, Crazy Horse met his martyr's fate, stabbed in the back by a soldier's bayonet under disputed circumstances at Fort Robinson, Nebraska.